Easter's coming up soon. In fact, it's the Sunday after the Monday that I'm uploading this video. And I've always thought of Easter as the churchiest or the most overtly religious of the various Christian-derived holidays that we celebrate here in the West. And so it's got me thinking a lot about church. And one of the things that I've been thinking about the last few days as I've been preparing to shoot this video is this concept of atheist church, or of atheists creating their own version of church, their own meeting, or their own weekly gathering that would be analogous to a Christian going to church on Sunday. I've never gone to an atheist church. I don't know really what's involved. I mean, I don't know what people do there. I don't know how it works. I don't know if there's like an atheist equivalent of a pastor who leads it. I don't know if they sing songs. I don't know if they get together and talk about science. Like, I'm not really sure how it works. I don't know how it would be different than just hanging out with some friends in a coffee shop, you know? But I'm intrigued by it. I'm intrigued by the idea that even though you reject the religious aspects of a church, you reject the supernatural element, you value the community, and maybe you value the culture. I know when my wife comes from a very religious family that are devoted churchgoers. They go to church twice a week, Sunday and Wednesday. And she still looks back fondly, even though she is no longer a churchgoer and she no longer believes the teachings of her church, her childhood church. She still looks back fondly at much of the church-going experience. I mean, there's a lot of it that she doesn't look back fondly on at all, but there is still a great deal of nostalgia when you hear her talk about certain aspects of going to church, and it's that sense of community, that sense of ritual, that sense of belonging, of having something to do, of having these beliefs and these rituals that put your life into a particular shape, or give your life a particular meaning or purpose, or give you a sense of identity within the context of a church or a community. And I totally understand that. I totally understand why people crave that and why that's important. And so I think that something like an atheist church, for people who feel like that's something that they need, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a good thing. And I don't think there's anything contrary to atheism about it. I mean, there's nothing about being an atheist that makes you allergic to community or even allergic to ritual. You just don't believe that there are gods. You don't believe in the theistic or the deistic claims of religions. You can still be perfectly fine going to a meeting every week and seeing the same people and being part of a community and things like that. Though my family is nominally Christian, and I think in our family history we come from Methodist stock, my immediate family growing up was never terribly religious. In fact, we only actually went to church regularly on a weekly basis for about a year, starting when I was 6 going on 7. And I remember the approximate date because that Easter, and it was the Easter of 1987, when I would have been 6, about a month away from turning 7, I received as a gift from my parents for Easter a Bible to take to church. We had just started going to church as a family, and it's still probably the nicest Bible I've ever owned. It was a little, called the Children's Bible. It was, about maybe yay big, a little smaller than like a standard adult like pew Bible, and it had a lovely painted cover, a printing of a painted cover of a scene of Jesus talking to children, and it was the King James version on the inside. It was just an ordinary Bible, but in between, in certain sections, there were these really nice glossy pages of paintings of sort of the Bible's greatest hits, like a painting of the creation, which was basically just clouds and planets, and the Garden of Eden and the Exodus, and then on through other episodes of the Old Testament. I forget how many there were, and then into the major episodes from the life of Jesus, like the virgin birth, the nativity generally, and the first miracle and things like that.
It was a really nice Bible. Like I say, in terms of just the handsomeness of the volume, it's still probably the nicest Bible I've ever owned. And I took it to Sunday school with me and took it to church with me. And my mom and dad had got me this little suit, a little like 6-year-old boy sized suit with a vest and a jacket and everything. It's still probably the nicest suit I've ever owned. It's interesting how certain levels of my life peaked at like 6 or 7 years old. That was when I had the nicest Bible I've probably ever owned and the nicest suit I've probably ever owned. The suit I wore to church when I was 6 was like 1,000 times nicer than the suit that I got married in. A few weeks ago, I had Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, and we had a short conversation, which I always try to do. I like to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses when they knock on my door, and I told them I was an atheist, and one of them said, "Well, why are you an atheist? What happened? Was there some negative experience that pushed you away from religion, from faith?" And she said it she didn't say it like in an accusatory tone. It was a very pleasant, friendly conversation. But it just reminded me that so many religious folks, especially those who have been sort of directed to be evangelists or missionaries or whatever, they have this assumption that, well, if you are an unbeliever, if you're an atheist or whatever, you must have had some terrible negative experience in your background that made you turn away from the church. And with me, I honestly have never had that. My year of going to church with my family when I was 6 or 7, well, I don't miss going to church. It wasn't like an overwhelmingly positive experience. It was just something that I had to do every Sunday. And it's not something, looking back, that I hated. It certainly wasn't a negative experience. A few of my friends from school actually happened to go to that same church. So I got to see them, on the weekends at Sunday school or at like a church function or whatever. So that was kind of fun. I remember Vacation Bible School being kind of interesting, kind of fun, going and doing activities and making arts and crafts and things like that. And, church picnics it wasn't a negative experience at all. And it certainly didn't give me any negative motivation to turn my back on the Lord and become an atheist. And that's just not what happened. We just kind of stopped going at one point and just never went back.
The only other significant experience I've had going to church, like attending church, was around 14 years ago when I was in a relationship with a girl who was a very devoted Christian. And she was not the stereotypical, like the caricature of a very religious Christian that a lot of us have. She was totally cool. She was great to hang out with. She swore. She liked movies. She was, but she had a very deep religious conviction, and she went to church pretty much every week. She would miss every now and then, but for the most part, she was a regular churchgoer. And eventually we got to the point where if we were together on Sunday, she wanted to go to church and I had to go with her. And I didn't have to. She never threatened me or twisted my arm or, tried to compel me unduly to go to church, but she let me know that it was important to her, and I said, okay, of course I'll go to church with you. And the times I went to church with her were the only other, significant church-going experiences I've really ever had. And since she and I broke up in 2002, I think the only other times I've ever been to church have been for weddings. And honestly, I would rather go to church just to go to a regular church service than go to church to have to go to a wedding if I had a choice. It's not even that different, because I detest weddings more than almost anything. And there are a few experiences I remember from going to church with her. One is the church community and how nice everybody was, but at the same time how just almost painfully square everybody was. If I wanted to describe them using a less kind word, I might say lame. They weren't the wittiest, sharpest, funniest, hippest people. They were very nice, but very bland. It was an indicator that even if we leave the religious disagreements aside, that these were just not my people. They were totally cool, totally nice people, but they were just not my people. I just would never have felt at home in that group. There was another time, and I think I've told this story to people before, and I can't remember if I've told it in a video or not, but we were listening to a sermon, and I remember it was not the church's usual pastor. The regular pastor was there, but he was having a guest pastor that Sunday. Someone from another church had come in to give the sermon this Sunday. And he was talking about commitment and, what have you given to the church, or what have you given to the Lord's work in general. And he told a story about how he had helped to build a church when he was a young man, and he had cut himself while he was working on the church, and he had bled on the wood, and to this day his blood is still soaked into the wood of that church. And he took a great deal of meaning from this. He really wrung this metaphor dry of, he literally bled and put his blood into this church. And what have you done? How have you put your blood and your sweat into the church? And then he said something that was absolutely extraordinary, and it's something I have always remembered. I remember to this day. He said, I'll tell you one thing I'm sick of hearing. I'm so sick of hearing people say that the church asks for money too much. The church hardly ever asks for money. He said this with absolute conviction and with almost with a touch of righteous anger, the church hardly ever asks for money. How dare people say this? There were probably ushers at that very moment when he said that, back in a back room, counting the money from the first collection. The church hardly ever asks for money. They take up a collection, I presume, at virtually every service they have, at least once a week, possibly twice a week. I'm not sure if that church held services on a day other than Sunday or not, but one would presume that church asks for money from its parishioners at least once a week, at least one day a week. How you can have the cognitive dissonance to be standing in a church service that has just finished asking everyone in that room for money, to say that the church hardly ever asks for money. It just boggles my mind. I cannot understand how you can come to be in such a state. But he said it, and as far as I could tell, every single person in that room, including my girlfriend who was sitting right next to me at the time, was right with him, because as soon as he said that, I was immediately going like this. Did everybody hear that? Am I the only one who heard that? Am I the only one who thinks that sounds a little funny? And I remember my girlfriend and I having a discussion about it afterwards, and she didn't see anything strange about it. She was like, well, it's the collection. They take it up every week. I mean, they're not asking you for money. They're just giving you the opportunity to give if you feel compelled to give. If you want to tithe, if you want to make a contribution to the church, that's your chance to do it. Which is such horseshit and such a rationalization, but I guess that's the excuse. Well, we're not asking for money. We're just passing the plate around. So I guess implicitly asking for money. Even though when you pass the plate around, everybody knows what that means, and the act itself is asking for money. The pastor never gets up and says, could you please give us some money? When we pass the plate around, could you please put some money in? He never actually says that, so it doesn't count.
A few years ago, I was having a conversation with a sweet old lady, a lady of a certain age, I should say, after a library event. And we were talking about teachers and how teachers are underappreciated. And I said, teaching is probably the most important profession, and yet it's also the lowest paid profession. And she corrected me. She said, oh, actually, clergy is lower paid than teaching. That's the lowest paid profession. So I said, okay, fair enough, I'll rephrase. Teaching is the lowest paid useful profession. And I knew full well at the time that I said that her husband was a retired pastor. But I said it anyway. And a few months, I think, after we had that conversation, her husband died. I'm still not sorry I said it.